Hello there, people of the internet. The rifle that we have here today is not the rifle that we are actually going to be discussing. The rifle we're going to be discussing is actually the Lee Metford rifle, and that is a rifle that I'm deciding to talk about simply because it is a very important part for, what I'm doing here. Let me explain what I'm doing here first. I am videoing all of my rifles, going through the history and mechanics and shooting of every single one of them in hopes of earning my way up to 100,000 subscribers. So if you'd like to be a part of that, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because I'm setting up a video out every single day, or at least trying my absolute best to be able to do that. But I'm going into the British rifles next up. I just finished up the Russian rifles, but I'm going through the British rifles, and the Lee Metford is absolutely a fantastic start to the British rifle series. This right here is actually a #1 Mark III, the SMLE model, and we are going to go ahead and use it as a representation for the Metford model because it is actually incredibly similar. So I got myself a little cheat sheet here. We're going to go ahead and go over some of the facts of the Metford model. And it's pretty much the same exact action, but the only differences between the SMLE and the actual Lee Metford is the fact that the rifling styles inside of the barrel are just a little bit different. We'll go ahead and we'll cover that here in a second. So the name of the person that actually developed the action system itself, his name was James Paris Lee. And the guy who made the Metford rifling inside of the barrel, which is what the rifle is named after, we got Lee Metford. That his name was William Metford. Now, the intention of the Lee Metford rifle was to replace the Martini Henry, which was a falling block action single shot rifle that the British used for a very, very long time. And they were looking to replace it in 1888. Now, original designs for the Lee Metford rifle, it was intended to be used with a .303 caliber round, a .303 British round, but the Lee Metford rifle was actually being created, developed, and deployed before cordite and smokeless powder was fully developed. So early .303 British rounds and early Lee Metford rifles were actually being used with black powder instead of the new modern smokeless powder. Now, there were some issues with the sighting systems as a result of that. Originally, whenever they were working on the sights, they were trying to develop the sights for what they thought the coalition, however that word is pronounced, the correlation with how the smokeless powder ammunition was going to be able to perform at long distances. They tried graduating their sight out for those distances for that future smokeless powder round that did not exist yet while they were still using black powder rounds, and they actually were not able to successfully pull that off. So after the first batch of Lee Metford rifles were made, they actually had to go through and re-evaluate how that sighting system was actually done. So that's just a little interesting piece of history. They were using black powder, and they knew that they were going to go to smokeless powder, so they tried getting things back together, or they tried predicting, that's the word I'm trying to look for, they tried predicting the sighting system for that black powder, or for that smokeless powder, replacing black powder, but it just did not work out in their favor. Now, with the Lee pattern of system, let me go ahead and set my piece of paper aside here. The original Lee pattern system on the Metford rifles, the bolt actually rotated only 60 degrees as opposed to, like, say, Mauser's 90-degree style. And as a result, these right here, since they had such a short throw with the bolt handle, they actually did extremely well in terms of speed with these rifles. You could fire the Lee system incredibly fast just because you have that shorter bolt throw, meaning the bolt has to travel a less distance to be able to open the rifle. I also want to point out that early Lee Metford systems were a 8-round magazine. This one's in there pretty stiffly, but they were an 8-round magazine as opposed to later examples of the Lee Metford system, which actually adopted a double stack 10-round magazine. The original were single stack, and they only held 8 rounds versus the new style of pattern of magazine, which held 10 rounds, and that did carry over to the SMLE system. These right here are 10-round magazines. The original design of the Lee Metford rifle actually had safeties that are very reminiscent to what we have right here on the SMLE pattern. They looked basically identical, a little bit of a change with the contour itself, but they looked basically identical to this, and they operated basically the same way. Well, later patterns of the Lee Metford rifle, the British just decided that the safety was, a cost that they didn't need to deal with, because the Lee Metford rifles still used a magazine disconnect system. But they actually got rid of the manual safety on those old school Lee Metford rifles. So they originally, the safeties did look something like this, but they actually got rid of that entire system altogether on the Lee Metford rifles. On this side of the rifle, this rifle does not have it because this is not a Lee Metford rifle, but there is actually a magazine cutoff, which was a piece of stamped sheet metal that you could pull out or push in depending on whether or not you wanted your bolt to be able to pick up rounds from your magazine, whether or not you wanted to single load the magazine or single load the rifle, or be able to rapid shoot from the magazine directly. Now I do want to point out that the nose cap on this particular rifle is quite a deal different than the nose cap that would be on the Lee Metford rifles. This right here is actually inspired from some carbine versions that they did, but that's probably a topic from a for another video. This right here is not what the nose cap for the Lee Metford actually looks like. In fact, the Lee Metford is reminiscent to, say, the Mosin Nagant 9130. That's kind of what it reminds me of, but it would look something more similar like that. The barrel would extrude past the nose cap, and the nose cap would just be this little piece of metal on the end. Really not that notable of a nose cap, unlike the SMLE here, which has a very identifiable nose cap immediately. So the main problem with the Lee Metford rifle is whenever it was created and developed and put into use, like I said before, they were still using the black powder rounds, the black powder 303 British ammunition. And as a result, since they were using black powder burns not nearly as hot as the smokeless cordite, and not nearly as high of pressures as smokeless cordite. So the Metford rifling was just fine. However, whenever they transitioned over to smokeless powder, it was found that the barrel life for these rifles were significantly less than what the British military was actually looking for. It only took about 6,000 rounds or so to be able to burn out a barrel with Lee Metford rifling, which is why they ended up going back to a more traditional style of rifling. Now, Lee Metford rifling, what that is it's kind of like an like an oval-shaped rifling. It's very shallow cut. It's very, very reminiscent of something that would be used in the black powder era. But for smokeless powder, it just, because of those shallow cuts, it would wear out dramatically too quickly. So as a result, the British did end up going with the more traditional style of rifling, which would be able to last much, much longer through heavier use. Now, the Metford rifles, they were actually made all the way up to 1896. However, of course, because they were made and they were used in multiple conflicts, including the Boer Wars, they were still used many, many, many times all across the world by a multitude of different forces. So even though they were made until 1896, of course, Britain and other countries and whatnot were still using them well past then. As a matter of fact, well past then, because they are literally still used to this day for ceremonial purposes. Those Lee Metford rifles are literally still in use to this day for ceremonial purposes, despite the fact that they stopped production in 1896, and that is absolutely impressive. So normally what I would do now is I would go ahead and I would send a couple of rounds down range out of whatever rifle it is that I had, but I don't have a Lee Metford, which is why I'm using this #1 Mark III to try and show off the Lee Metford the best that I can. It's very, very similar in terms of the Lee Metford, very similar action, just kind of missing a magazine disconnect, and we have a safety on the back that would be not something that you find very often on Lee Metford rifles, and the actual barrel, the rifling inside of the barrel is going to be different on this one right here, because this right here is obviously a later variant. But hopefully you guys still enjoyed the video, and hopefully this was able to show you guys at least a little bit about what it is that we're dealing with. So if you want to see more videos like this, then like I said before, I have a whole series coming up. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hopefully this earned your subscription. If not, then I'll try again tomorrow, because like I said, this is going to be a daily endeavor. So tomorrow, whenever I actually show off this rifle and we shoot this rifle, we'll go ahead and check out the SMLE style rifle that we actually have here. I'd like to get my hands on a actual Lee Metford. That'd make a fantastic video, but unfortunately I just don't have the means to be able to pull that off right now. So this right here is the best that I can do. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the best that I could do, and I hope that it earned your subscription. If not, then like I said, I will try again tomorrow. That being said, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and go check that out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see y'all on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.